Welcome back. Well, it seems that, like it or not, we may have found ourselves in election season this fall, and elections are won and lost on how the economy is faring. So how is Canada doing? Here's a look by the numbers. The Canadian economy is pretty lackluster. The 2.1% growth in the summer quarter of this year was driven almost entirely by government spending, and per capita GDP actually declined for the fifth consecutive quarter. Bright spots include household disposable incomes. They were up 7% in second quarter, and the savings rate, which increased to 7.2%. Still, most of those gains were concentrated among the wealthiest Canadians. That decline in per capita GDP translates into a drop of 7% or $4,200 per Canadian, and usually spells a worsening quality of life. The biggest culprit, of course, falling productivity, especially in the goods-producing sectors like agriculture, manufacturing, and construction, which tend to have productivity that's as much as 30% higher than the service sectors. The trouble is that since the pandemic, the productivity of the goods-producing sectors is down 1.2% a year. Construction was the biggest culprit, with a 5-year average decline in productivity north of 2%. That worsening of productivity coincides with construction's growing importance. There are now more hours worked in construction than manufacturing. In 2023, 12.6% of all hours in Canada were construction jobs. There is one bright spot here: finance, insurance, real estate, rental, and leasing. They've got productivity gains of 3.2% since the pandemic. That's way above their U.S. counterparts, which have 0.4%. The economists at TD say policies like tax reform, a focus on improving construction efficiency and eliminating barriers to investment, are all good ways to boost productivity. Well, that pesky productivity problem is one that keeps economists up at night, but it might not be an issue that resonates with voters. So what will? Goldy Hyder is President and CEO of the Business Council of Canada. Goldy, thanks for being with us.
Great to be with you.
So this question of how to translate these kind of really important issues of how to get our economy moving into terms that most people can understand and care about is a big one. What do you think we should be talking about when it comes to the health of the economy?
Well, look, first things first, we have to acknowledge the pain that people are feeling. This is not artificial. This is real because the statistics back it up, right? Unemployment is obviously heading in the wrong direction. It's up. The gap between U.S.-Canada wages in terms of debt to GDP, or sorry, excuse me, GDP per capita and stuff, that's heading in the wrong direction. Many people feel that they're not getting ahead. And so why is that happening? You know, our economy is slowing down, partly on purpose because we were trying to deal with inflation. But we don't have a plan, Amanda. We're lacking a plan to turn this around, to invest in Canadians, to invest in the jobs that Canadians want, which is not something that you do on the backs of debt. You do it on the backs of growth. And that's what's missing here is we're spending a lot of money in government in deficits and debt, but we're not spurring the economy and the growth that's necessary.
And of course, we've seen a lot of government spending. Job creation has been driven by governments. Investments have been driven by governments. We want the private sector to do it. It's the healthier, more long-term growth. It's not on the backs of taxpayers. What do businesses need to feel more confident to invest? Because business investment, while there's some glimmers of light, it's still not very good, Goldy.
Yeah, look, what we don't need is necessarily a lot of capital. There's a lot of capital available. What's missing? I'm just coming from a meeting with, a little over 110 or 120 CEOs from Canada, and what they're telling us is we're getting in our way. We're not collaborating. The regulation burden is number one on the list of concerns for us. We're a country where, one of our guests was actually former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, United Kingdom, and we were just discussing interprovincial trade barriers. And if you thought he had messy hair before, you should see what it looked like after. He kept going, what are those? And why are they there? Why are we having, in a country like ours, things that amount to own goals? We've got to figure out a way to get out of our way, create the conditions for investment, create the conditions for growth. That comes from predictability and stability. And it also takes a partnership, Amanda, and I can't stress this enough. Other countries are moving forward, whether it's the United Kingdom, whether it's the United States, whether it's Australia. We just saw an industrial policy approach released by the EU. If we don't figure this out, we're going to get left behind, and then Canadians will suffer even more. And they're expecting us in the business community, the governments and the people in labor movements and others to work together. Academics, people who are producing the skills for tomorrow, they're counting on us to do that, and we don't have a place where we're even doing that right now.
Do you think we may have warded off an immediate election, but it feels as though we're headed to one earlier than we might have thought? The economy is always going to be a ballot box issue. Do you think that the right issues will be debated, or will they be oversimplified for voters?
Well, Well, it certainly seems to be being oversimplified. That's just the norm of politics, not just in Canada, but pretty much around democracies around the world. But it's time for us to look a little further down the road, and I know that's hard for politicians to do. There's a lot of short-termism here, and frankly, it's driving some of the anxiety, I think, that Canadians are feeling. They're legitimately feeling the angst off the top. What they're looking for is, what are you going to do to help me? And what I'm finding, again, looking back at the information I'm getting from the CEOs of the companies that at least I represent, Canadians on a personal level, you'll be not surprised to hear, are managing the challenges that they're facing responsibly, fiscally responsibly. They're making choices as they went back to school, shopping for their kids. They might have had to buy new shoes or a new knapsack, but they didn't buy another hat or another shirt or another shorts. If they fit the kids last year, they're good enough for this year. They're making choices, but our governments are not doing that. We're continuing to borrow, and whose money is it? It's our money that they're spending. We need to have a growth strategy. We put out a paper called Engines of Growth. You can see it at thebusinesscouncil.ca. It's 17 recommendations. These are things that we can do working together collaboratively, and I hope our politics of bad, what's good politics doesn't make for bad policy, or we're going to pay the price.
Goldy, so good to have you. Appreciate your time.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
Goldy Hyder, President and CEO of the Business Council of Canada. Well, facts can get a little lost in the spin when it comes to politics, but what should the next election be fought about? Sean Speer is editor-at-large at The Hub. Sean, great to have you with us.
It's always great to be with you, Amanda.
So in some ways, the economy is always the issue. And of course, in this case, the incumbent is wearing a lot of bad news. Do you think that's what ultimately it will come down to for voters in the next election?
I think that's right, although I think for a lot of your audience members, that's probably a somewhat regrettable outcome. Let me explain, Amanda. We're focused primarily these days on what you might describe as the microeconomy, issues like affordability, housing prices, etc. But it seems to me that the secular challenge, the really big economic issue facing Canada, is at the more macro level. Our economy is stagnant. Business investment is too low. Our productivity is flat or declining. In some ways, we're going to have a pocketbook campaign, but what we really need to have is a more fundamental one about how we get this economy growing faster. Because as you and I have talked about in the past, the difference between 2% growth and 3% growth isn't 1%, it's 50%, and that would go a long way in solving a lot of the micro issues that Canadian voters are saying that they're facing.
I mean, such a good point, and of course, it's hard sometimes to get anybody normal interested in an idea like productivity. It's kind of boring, and also it's sort of opaque, right? How do you fix productivity? I don't know about you, but I don't hear really easy to grab answers to that question. We will, though. We will hear talk about affordability. We will hear talk about a carbon tax, of course. Does that distract from some of those more important issues and from the political parties actually making platforms based on them?
I think there's something to that. I mean, at the end of the day, the campaign will be what voters want to be about. But I do hope that the political parties that have a plausible shot at winning the next election aren't just thinking about the campaign. They're thinking about a broader policy agenda to get at some of those fundamental issues that are holding back investment and holding back productivity. We have a regulatory a policy here in the country, particularly as it relates to major projects, which has put a real chill on business investment. We have long-standing problems like interprovincial trade issues that no doubt you've talked a lot about on this program, and the list goes on and on. So it's a long way of saying I think there has to be a responsiveness to what voters are saying at the doors, but that doesn't preclude or get parties off the hook that they also need to be focused on some of these bigger, more fundamental ones.
I was digging into some of the productivity data, courtesy of that great report TD did recently, and to see that the construction sector is one of the big culprits in a decline in productivity, even as it grows to be a bigger share of our workforce, right? 12% of the jobs now in construction are related. Would you like to see sort of very focused policy? In other words, the government saying, we're going to create a task force to improve the efficiency of construction?
I think it's a brilliant insight. Keep in mind, Amanda, that Canadian governments, both at the national level and provincial levels, are spending hundreds of billions of dollars on public infrastructure over the coming years. I would like to see, at the risk of getting a bit wonky, almost like a set-aside from that investment to support innovation projects to try to figure out how we can unlock that productivity in our construction sector. It's important not just to bring down the costs of projects, but in an age, Amanda, where the average age in the construction sector is rising rapidly, if we don't figure out how to do more with less, we're going to be facing major deficits across our residential and commercial infrastructure. So it's a very long way of saying I think you're precisely right to zero in on that as a type of innovative policy that we need to see to try to get at these fundamental productivity issues that have been facing the country not just in the past decade, but really for the better part of 20 years.
So good to have your thoughts, Sean. Always appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Sean Speer is editor-at-large at The Hub. Still ahead, Canadian companies are now responsible for the labor they use all through the global supply chain. The good news is they seem to be rising to the occasion. That's coming up. But first, Amazon became the latest company to order its employees back to work all 5 days of the week and said it would do away with a mid-layer of management to streamline its operations. Workers at the online retailer have already been back at least 3 days this year. Amazon said it was clear that being in the office together had a positive impact. We're going to guess this new policy will get some less than positive reviews from Amazon staff. We're back after this.